This is sort of the conversational reflection feedback opportunity we have as we round out our 3 days together. I'm going to just briefly do introductions. I have a bunch of questions that we've been chatting about in the background, gleaning from the Miro board and other things, but are also going to be open to additional questions and sort of feedback. So interaction, conversation are really the name of the game here as we close out our time together. So just as a brief introduction, my name is Heidi Roop. I'm an assistant professor of climate science and an extension specialist at the University of Minnesota. And in my split between science and application, I direct a program called the Climate Adaptation Partnership. Sorry, Ellen, we were the OG, established 2008. For folks who aren't aware, the RISA program was recently renamed the Climate Adaptation Partnership, but we couldn't imagine a better team or crew, an organization to share a name with. So at any rate, really work at the intersection of climate science and modeling and its use. And have been part of the WUCA trainings now for more years than I can count. So an honor to be back and to be in the hot seat here. Well, I guess you all, the panelists, are really in the hot seat because I'm the moderator today. But really to be part of this conversation and on a continued learning journey with you all. So I want to shout out to all of the presenters that came before this conversation, and of course, all the attendees who were also really critical in my learning journey, and I think the discussions and breakout rooms and other things. So thank you to you all for being here today. And a special shout out to our panelists. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction by way of name and title, and then we're going to launch in to some questions. And to those listening in, feel free to pop additional questions in the chat as they might come up for you as you hear reflections back from our panelists. So we're joined today by familiar faces that you may have already heard from or learned from through this time. But we have Jen Garliano here with us, who's the director of the part of the Bureau of Water Supply and Water Resource Management with the NYC Environmental Protection. So sorry, I'm also seeing more chats pop up, so I'm not good at moderating the two. I might, Alyssa, ask your help if in moderating the chat. We're also joined by Franco Montalto, who's a professor focused on civil architectural and environmental engineering at Drexel University. Howard Newkrug, who's the executive director of the Water Center at the University of Pennsylvania and brings a long history across different facets of water management and all it takes to think about science into action in the water sector. And last but not least, Mark Cambrata, who's the deputy water commissioner for planning at Philadelphia Water Department. So needless to say, we've got multiple perspectives from the science to the decision-making perspective, and we are going to launch into some discussions. And again, we've really been pulling from the Miro board, so we're trying to, in real time, respond to sort of feedback, shared challenges, opportunities that we all see moving forward out of our time together and into our action on the landscape. So for all the panelists, in no particular order, I'm going to open up with a question, and I'd love to hear what is one unexpected thing you learned this week, or anything that you found particularly exciting or hopeful that you heard from either attendees or your fellow presenters. I see, Howard, you're unmuted, so I'm going to ask you to go first.
Great. It's so interesting. The four of us that somehow got picked for this, we've all been working together, and not just ourselves, but our staffs and our colleagues, and worrying about these issues, very focused on the Delaware River, and Jen from New York City and whatever. But so I guess I've been noticing these trends that have been increasing over the last 20 years, and I thought we were on this like short little bump up into climate change, but now it looks like things are very different than what we expected even 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. And I'm just so curious about this what's going to come tomorrow. I did not know that climate change meant that there would be days of poor air quality in Philadelphia from wildfires in Canada and the West Coast, and so many other things have become a surprise that I'm just wondering and hoping that we all are looking at this big picture and seeing what's going on and how little we can do today to solve these problems that are gonna get bigger and bigger, and I think exponentially. And so that's it. So that's, I don't know, that's not very hopeful, but I think if we all agree on that, then that's pretty hopeful that we're moving this thing forward and making it a much more serious thing than we may have in the past.
Thank you, Howard. Yeah, I think that sobering reality, right?
Yeah.
It's here and now, maybe faster and greater. I think there's a shared sense of that, and just spending quite a bit of time looking at the mirror board and reflecting. I think there's a sort of undercurrent of a shared sentiment. And so hopefully we'll get to the sort of action and next steps through this discussion. Jen, I see that you've unmuted.
Yeah, so I would have to say that this has been a very validating experience. Um, knowing that a lot of us here are focused on the Delaware River Basin, but a lot of our presenters are from other parts of the nation, and that we are all in this struggle together. And if we can all hop on the struggle bus, maybe we can push it forward, and come to solutions. There are some really neat and innovative things that are going on, that I have learned about over the last couple of days. And we're in the process right now of trying to figure out, what are some good steps that we should be taking in the New York City water supply to mitigate against the effects of climate change. So there are some things that we've learned over the last couple of days that we're going to take back as we're going through our assessment. So it's been a really great opportunity to listen to some of the other things that people have got going on, but knowing that our challenges are not unique.
Yeah, right. I know, as someone who's responsible for thinking about the science and the integration and that foundational knowledge, I'm sure that there's lots to do, and hopefully new things you can weave in. And I think importantly, share back with your colleagues from a lot of the work and innovations that you're also driving in your space. So thank you. And Mark, I see that you've unmuted.
Yeah. I'm excited and hopeful about the continued progress. I mean, we're sitting in this forum, and Julia started kind of the event by saying, the water sector needs guidance and practical approaches to prepare and plan. And I just continue to see the progress that's being made, and not just in the science, right, and data understanding and mapping and tools, but relationships, the forums, case studies, right, the continued increasing in these amazing case studies that we hear from our colleagues, 39 leading practices. We hear guiding principles, we hear risk-based frameworks, decision-making, approaches. I mean, it's just such a complex, complicated, and messy issue. I think Heidi had said that, and maybe about the game we were going to play the other day, but it's just such a challenging issue. But we continue to see these amazing wins, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it because of the struggle bus that Jen had mentioned, but let's just focus on some of that project progress. I think that's what's been real exciting and hopeful in these last 2.5 days.
Wonderful. And Franco.
Yeah, so I mean, echoing a lot of what's already been said, but I'd say my vantage point as a sort of engineer, a practicing engineer, an engineering researcher, and an applied researcher at that. I mean, I don't do hypothetical research. I'm working with some of the folks on this call. In this meeting on real world decision making. What's been really exciting for me is to see this sort of gap between, on the one hand, the academic research, the science, and on the other hand, the decision making, which for so long were I felt that the barrier in between, which is kind of where I see myself, was really big. And what I see is that, we're beginning to see really interesting ways where those two ends are coming closer together. So one example that I really found inspiring yesterday was in a little chat that I had with Rob Lempert when we were talking about decision making under deep uncertainty. And I asked a question about benefit cost analyses, which I'm used to just being, we pick these design storms and we do the benefit cost analysis, and yet we have this really interesting methodology. And Rob kind of explained to me how you can use the decision-making under deep uncertainty to establish the events that you put in your benefit cost analysis so that the benefit cost analysis is more scaled to reality. And that's just one example. But I think what excites me is that this forum, this place where we're trying to really bring together the innovations in the science side and the sort of impact of the decision making together and sort of cross fertilize ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you. And actually, that's a really great segue to a question that I wanted to ask related to data uncertainty. So in the Miro boards, you'll see that several attendees across the different groups shared insights and questions related to things like decision making, decision makers, the key drivers associated with climate change decision making from political, economic, demographic, and regulatory realities for decisions and investments. And then, of course, the science as being part of this sort of decision ecosystem. And further, in some of the conversations that I was part of, we talked a lot about the need to not confuse or diminish like who has authority or decision-making authority, but also how to build a more collective or shared sense of responsibility and decision-making in the region. So Franco, I think you just outlined that sort of gap. Like, how do we not just narrow that gap, but maybe like better integrate? It's not just a bridge, but some sort of weaving or knitting of that sort of shared sense of decision-making or having some authority. So even the scientists are empowered to say, we have a role and responsibility. And so, Mark, I might start with you as a decision maker yourself. How might we start to create a more shared sense of decision making, particularly between scientists and practitioners? What could that ecosystem or that weaving look like from your perspective? And then, of course, any panelists, please chime in after.
I think we have to realize that with something, again, this big, this complex, this impactful, right, this long-term, this change, we have to really focus on kind of empowerment and trust and communication. And, we have to include people. We have to include anyone that has a voice, that has a say, that has a role, that has a talent, that has a desire to kind of, share their story, share their role. We got to give them a platform. Like, we just have to, it's that all hands on deck, we heard, earlier, right? We need to bring people into this mix. It's going to be based on trust. It's going to be based on communication, and we have to empower people to kind of be part of this long-term strategy that we need to address. So it's really just giving everyone a forum, a forum, and a voice. And I know that's kind of a little altruistic, easier said than done, but we gotta listen more to folks in this space.
Any other panelists want to comment or maybe share how we might do that? How do we create that either transparency, those opportunities to listen? How do we cultivate that trust, maybe within organizations and across the system, right? We're managing, and by we, I mean you all are managing across a very complex, highly densely populated region and watershed where decisions both upstream and downstream determine outcomes, quite frankly, for real people. So what is that? What could that look like? I see lots of nodding. Maybe Howard, I see you. Maybe you want to hop in.
There's just so many things, and I look at, and I'll take it. I know this is a little parochial for the downstream folks, but towards the downstream folks, but the cities with large populations of people of color and low income, like Philadelphia, Camden, and Chester, who are all waterfront, riverfront cities in the tidal portion of the river. It's, there is no voice for them. Their voice is coming from the CCMUA, Camden County Municipal Utility Authority, the Philadelphia Water Department. What we're really missing the stakeholders I think Mark was referring to, which is the community folks, and how do we get them involved, because these solutions are really going to turn out to be very, very, very local. I mean, I look at, and I know many of you do, look at the solutions as block by block in these bigger cities, and how do you fit all that together and get their voice heard within this bigger set of issues? And how do you, and there are answers to this. I mean, there's a couple of good examples. The one that Mark and I were involved with forming, which was the School Collaction Network, which is a fabulous example, very underfunded, but still a fabulous example of how you bring together different communities from downstream and upstream on the Schuylkill River. So that's a really great example that the water sector actually took out to Pittsburgh and started a system similar to that in Pittsburgh. And I guess the other one, the one that's forming now, or has in the last couple of years, is this water table initiative, which I don't really get, but it's nice because DVRPC, Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, is involved with it, which all of a sudden brings in the land folks who are absent from all our water discussions, and the developers, the people who want to develop along the waterfronts. And there's so many more stakeholders that we need to involve. And I think we're going to have to take a look at some of these different plans and ways. And and I chair the advisory committee for climate change at Delaware River Basin Commission, and we're stuck in this. We're responsible for water, which is great because that's everything we're talking about here. But the solutions to water are very much land-based, whether it's increased reservoir size for storage or improved permeability of water, so it doesn't create floods, and storage of water for droughts and many other things. So I'll stop there because I know we don't have a lot of time.
Great. Thank you, Howard. Jen, I saw some nodding while you were listening. Do you have anything you'd like to add in?
So my job takes me around the entire basin, and I don't know about everywhere else, but I feel like there are so many stakeholder groups in this basin, and there are so many competing interests, and trying to get everybody to come to the table to understand different points of view and perspectives and to dig themselves out of their bunker has probably been one of the biggest challenges that we have faced, because not everybody is open to listening to what other people are seeing, what other people are experiencing. But Howard had mentioned the DRBC. I think that does give us a unique venue to reach a lot of people, and it allows us to have that public forum so that we can kind of do this public education piece to try to at least bring awareness to people across the entire basin of all the different things that are happening. Whether or not they want to listen to it, that's another problem. But I do think that there has been this much larger effort in this public education component over the last few years. I mean, I think I have seen that directly, so that people become familiar with the data, that they understand what they're looking at. Like, I can just throw a graph on the screen, but that doesn't mean you're going to know what the information means or how to interpret it or how to use it. And that even goes back and forth, even within the water sector itself. A wet chemistry scientist might not understand what we are doing in the world of watershed protection and land management. So even that cross-loading between the different specialties within the water sector is also necessary to get everybody on the same page.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll draw on that thread of internal and external communication in a moment. Franco, I'd want to invite you. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. So, it's interesting when you talk about collaboration, people who don't collaborate or people who disagree with each other. Why do they disagree, right? They might disagree because they understand the reality and they have different responses to that reality. But oftentimes they disagree because they don't have the same understanding of the reality. And, one of the things when Amy Shallcross made her presentation yesterday about, the salt migration up and down the estuary, that was, I knew something about some of that, but I'd never seen it. I didn't understand it changed me. It gave me some perspective. And I just wonder if in this region, there's a appetite for more sharing, even if it's something like, even if we can't share models, because maybe, as in the conversation, the question and answer I had with Alan the other day, you know, maybe difficult to share models, but even just being aware that like, hey, there is a model of this area that's looking at these things, and of that area managed by this partner looking at those things. And if they were all on one big map, so that anyone anywhere in the basin who's beginning to think about, well, I'm planning this activity over here, or, you know, why would that utility do this? You know, they can kind of get the bigger picture. And so, you know, I'm one that just thinks that more, you know, there may be some people who disregard the science, but I think that the more we can be transparent about the science and the analyses that are going on, and the more we can make them accessible and available to a range of stakeholders, the chances of collaboration and for mutual understanding increase. So that's something I would just love to see more of, is just sharing amongst the different partners what we're working on.
Fabulous. And that is another beautiful segue into one of my favorite questions that I think I love to hear about and inspire folks towards action. So just as listeners, be prepared. We are going to ask you to think about your next steps. So I would love to build on Franco's sort of theme of collaboration and coordination. We know that large sort of entities like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change are calling for improved coordination and collaboration. They state across sectors, jurisdictions, geographic, and geopolitical boundaries, all in the name of accelerating implementation of climate adaptation. And so I would love to hear from our other panelists, and Franco, you can feel free to add more. But what would you all like to see as far as concrete ways we could improve coordination and collaboration across the Northeast region? I think, Howard, you mentioned a few things around different stakeholders. And maybe just as a bookmark to kind of round out your comment is just is there anything that's working really well? I've heard some organizations, I know they're sort of still defining workflows for certain groups and collaborative efforts, but yeah, what can we do to improve coordination and collaboration across the region, and what's working well right now? And Howard, you're unmuted, so the ball's in your court.
Well, you know, something I used to say all the time, just coming back to me, is that when I worked at Philly Water, we would talk water, and the mayor and city council and our community stakeholders would say crime, education, quality of life, level of service, and other things like that. And I think that's the avenue we have, because, and I'm sure there are a number of people on this call who know how many miles of tribs there are to the Delaware, but it covers a lot of ground. And when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about what's happening to your house, what's happening to your creek. You know, so got to get this out into the community. And the easiest first step is, and I know we all hate to do this, but is to involve the mayors and the city council people, you know, who may take extreme views, and might be hard to, you know, balance their ideas with what our ideas might be, but it's really needed if you want to get to that point of equity, and the point of how are you going to manage this thing? Yeah, you can build a new dam in the Delaware River, but you know, we're not doing that. We're looking at other solutions, and more balanced solutions, like in a lot of green infrastructure. And some of the work we're doing now is how do you balance green infrastructure with gray infrastructure and blue infrastructure, and how does all those things work together? And the green gets stopped all the time because of a community that doesn't understand the benefits of that for both adaptation and mitigation.
Can I respond directly to that?
Please.
I mean, you know, one of the objections I had to the game yesterday, I mean, the game was a lot of fun, but this idea that prosperity and development was sort of a counterpart, or, you know, at the expense of resilience, I think that's got to go away. I just really, I can't understand how, you know, to Howard's point, like the mayors are interested in these quality of life issues, and we are interested in, you know, managing stormwater, reduce, you know, some kind of water quality impact. But they're like still stovepiped. There's still these people over there and these people over here. And the game kind of like drove that home, because you lose prosperity points for investing in resilience, which I just think that's just antiquated, got to go away. And I would love to see, you know, can we go beyond green infrastructure standards to green infrastructure integration, or can we, can we think of ways that development is not always going to result in negative impact, so that more development actually gives us more of what we want? Each time you get a new project along the coast, it's incrementally putting in a barrier. Each time you're putting in a road or a bikeway, it's sending water into the ground. I don't know, but like, I think that if we could kind of figure that stuff out and stop thinking about it's either this or that, I think we would make more progress.
Wonderful. Yeah, those silos. And Jen, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, so this is a leadership issue. Like, being a municipality, I can't make the changes that I need to make without leadership buy-in. And I say a lot that one of the toughest parts of my job is politically negotiating science. I have to be able to make that argument to my leadership to be able to get the resources that I need, whether it's funding or staff or a consultant or whatever it is. I have to be able to make that argument to the leadership that this issue is important and that it is more important than some of the other issues that are going on, because they are being pulled in 8,000 different directions. And it's not easy, like, to get up there in front of everybody to make your case. But I think there has been a big shift in thinking, at least from the New York City perspective. Like with Ophelia, that's a good example. Stormwater and everything is a huge issue. Climate change is a huge issue. And I think as we see more and more of these cloudbursts and extreme storms, I think they're starting to get it. But that doesn't mean that we still don't have a battle and a long way to go. But it really does. It really is a leadership issue.
Absolutely. Sort of hard, right? Seeing is believing, but it also requires reminding. We see from the literature too, from communication scholarship, that, we're resetting our baseline for what is extreme as we live through these extremes. We're shifting up and what counts as extreme. We're getting socialized and sort of numbed to these realities. And so I think it's a complicated but ongoing communications challenge. So for folks listening in, we're going to transition to your questions, and I see a few comments and reflections in the chat, but encourage you to add those in as we go. I'm going to invite our panelists. We're going to just sort of pick up on this last question, and I'd like to know one thing you all wish, and sort of this is related to communication, and we could talk more about this, and maybe there'll be some questions in the chat. But what's one thing you wish all staff within your organization, or for particular stakeholders or customers, that they knew or appreciated about the climate change and water management related work that you or that your colleagues are doing in this region? So that could be sort of an internal communication. I wish everyone in my organization appreciated X, or I wish everyone that we work with from the public side or the consumer side understood X. So I might, let's see, we'll ping pong here. We'll go to Mark.
Cool, thank you. I had the chance a couple of weeks ago at an award ceremony to tout the talents and the progress made by our climate adaptation team. So they got a little bit of a shout out. So I'm glad that opportunity presented itself. But what I wish I could do is kind of take what was shared that night and share it with a wider audience. And really, I would just say, there's so many talented people that are wanting and worrying and trying and pushing each other to continue to kind of be better and more informed at what it is they're doing, which is work that's all trying to do good for others, right? Like, and I just think we got to celebrate. We have to celebrate the team. We have to show them just how hard they're working. I mean, they're all public servants, right? They're here to serve, and we're supposed to do our business behind the scenes and be quiet but we just don't kind of broadcast that enough. And it really, I mean, everything they do each day is for the greater good. And it's just amazing to watch kind of the inner workings of this group and the bigger collective, obviously, everyone just taking so much pride and so much worry in addressing something so complicated, but all for the greater good. So I wish we could push that out into the world a lot more than maybe we do now.
Wonderful. I think we do need more success stories. And we know too from science, right, that recipients of gratitude and celebration are more often and more likely to repeat those acts for which they've been acknowledged. So I would say in every step in the right direction, we have to celebrate because we need many more as we go along. So I'm really pleased to hear also that there is an award that you mentioned, an award ceremony. I think that celebration of success and gratitude is so essential to our continued success in this space. I think, Jen, you unmuted first. I'd love to hear what's the one thing you wish we all knew or that your staff knew or people outside your organization understood?
That there's no silver bullet. There really isn't one solution that is going to work for everybody. It's really so nuanced to your region, your city, your basin, whatever it is. And a lot of times, they think there's just one simple thing that can be done, and that really just is not the case. And it really comes down to being able to understand the bigger picture, everybody's perspectives. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to come up with a compromise, because there is no such thing as a perfect program, and you will never be able to achieve that perfect program. But you can give somebody, the best that you're able to do. So getting people to understand that perfection is not possible. There is not a simple solution, but being able to compromise and meet as many people's needs as possible is really what we're trying to achieve.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you for those reflections. Howard, I see you're also unmuted.
Yeah, I'm getting the picture of this game. I have to go mute in between questions. But yes, I don't know, I lost my train of thought there. But there's, what was the question again?
What's one thing you wish everyone, either within your organization and outside of your
I'll tell a little story. This
knew?
is not, I'm always doing, I like crisis, which causes action. But I have an engineer friend whose name I won't mention because most people on this call won't like this scenario. But they say, he said to me, there are 9 billion people on Earth or something like that right now, and that he expects in 100 years there'll be 1 billion because of climate change. And which is a positive thing because we're not going to die out as a species. But the idea of the amount of catastrophe that we are about to face, and it's not like it's going to happen for like 5-10 years and then everything gets back to normal. I mean, this is forever, or at least for our sense of forever. And it just really calls on that work for the mitigation side to really do things. But on the adaptation side, yes, we have to work on this. And the way I express this is that there are only 3 things that can go with water. It could be too much, it could be too little, or it could be too dirty. Beyond that, and then you look at that, and I think somebody said this earlier, it seems so simple, but the thing that gets us all going each morning is the fact that and you can argue whether there's every block, every square mile, every community has a different set of answers that need to be put into place. And those answers are very, very, very highly localized. And how we learn that and express that and bring that to everyone is really the question that's really standing out there. And thank you to Julia for coming back to the Philadelphia Water Department so many years ago and starting a climate change group and seeing all the success it has now.
Wonderful. Yes. Huge shout out to Julia. And Franco, what's the one thing?
Yeah. So I guess on this panel, I represent universities to some extent, or Howard also, but I mean, at the same award ceremony that Mark referenced before, I got to talk a little bit about universities and their role that they could play in problem solving. And, one thing, I talk to students every day who want solutions to be incorporated into their education. So they have to do a thesis, they have to do a project. They don't want a hypothetical project. They want a real world project. They don't want to wait till they graduate to be part of the solution. And we want them to learn those lessons now so that when they graduate, they don't, like in Howard's example, right? We can't, they need the tools now. And so I guess, to any educators on the call, I think you need to get out of the university and get into the real world and build real world problems into your classes, into your research proposals, into, all of the work that NOAA funds, for example. Make that the research is solving a problem and is demonstrating a solution that then you can broadcast to other people. And then, I mean, to the students as well, it's, let me say to the utilities, mine your local academic institutions, make them, work with you, for you, alongside with you, because there are people there who want to, and they don't know how. They're stuck, they're trapped in the ivory tower, and they don't know like what you need and how to do it. So they do their own thing. So I just think that there's a lot more higher education and even high school education can play a major role, and at the same time train the next generation of people who are going to work on these things. And we can do it right now. And I just want to see those barriers go away.
Wonderful. As an academic, I couldn't agree more. Of course, we need our funding proposals and things like that, our science funding agencies, to actually truly value and evaluate our work in that way. I struggle with things like the National Science Foundation, and most people reviewing those proposals don't really appreciate the realities and complexities of such work. But another conversation for another day, right? I would love to invite any questions in the chat if anyone has them. I would like to draw attention to a comment from Abby Sullivan, who presented earlier this week, but on the sort of realities of equitable and inclusive resilience planning processes and how resource intensive those can be, and the lack of the ability to secure the necessary resources to do that critical work. That was more of a kind of reflection on a comment that Howard had made, but we didn't really have time to weave in the sort of complexities of funding. But I don't know if any of our panelists want to comment even briefly on that, some of these the funding realities. So we just heard this call to action for the science community. I wonder if there's anything anyone else would like to layer in related to funding, or even, I know we've talked about in some of the breakouts I was in, the timeline. It's really hard. Planning takes a long time and implementation takes even longer. And somehow we're like in this sprint mode, particularly with a lot of the one-time federal money that's available. And that is a very real tension between the sort of science and feeling like you have the right answer and then being able to do the thing you want to do.
Well, first of all, I thought that Abby was my friend, but I'll change that now. Sorry, I'm just
We're
kidding.
friends. I was agreeing with you, but
We're
just
friends. She did say,
commiserating.
Howard, I agree with what you're saying. And I think she's layering in her particular institutional and experiential
Yeah, I mean, the money, everything, it's all about money, right? Well, there's, the science that we still don't know, but it comes down to everything. It comes down to the money issue. And there are so many of them. And yes, stakeholder involvement and going out to the block captains is kind of like a crazy idea to do more than like 2 or 3 times a year. But there are other things that are also out there, and the term One Water and the term holistic integrated watershed management, are things that really we start to get the federal government to allow us to make our own decisions about what's most important in terms of fixing a CSO, fixing an MS4, or building a new water treatment plant, and recognize that there is limited money and that somebody somewhere has to prioritize. And the great thing about a lot of the work that Mark and company are doing is that it has those extra benefits of providing things that that communities can appreciate, and mayors and others can appreciate, and hopefully someday even contribute to. Because shouldn't all be on the water utility. That's kind of the problem we're having right now. So for some reason, the water utilities seem to be taking the brunt of the climate change needs.
Yeah, the challenge of being the early adopter and leader, right? Everyone sees your successes and turns around and says, they've got it under control. They can figure it out. They can continue to take the lead. I don't know, Franco, you just unmuted. I'll maybe invite a last comment or reflection, and then I'll do a quick wrap up.
Well, I just want to, reflect on what you said and the comment from Abby as well. I think some of this requires us to think about how do we do things in a different way than we've done it before, right? So if in the context of academic research, when you say, it's hard to get NSF to pay for this, well, yeah, unless you incorporate the community members or the government agencies on the project team, so they're funded by the project team, so that the research itself is happening. So you change the way the enterprise of research happens by engaging stakeholders in actually conducting the research. So it's not like we're going to go do this program at a high school for extra money that really doesn't benefit, doesn't maximize the benefits, but we're building it in. And I think the same might be true. I mean, I don't work for a planning agency, but yes, if you do a traditional planning process, then you have to fund that traditional planning process. But if planning activities and equitable engagement could be sort of more decentralized into a variety of different operations, structures that already exist, like Howard mentioned, block captains, or networks of community-based organizations, or there are ways of leveraging existing pieces of infrastructure to promote equity without having like a formal planning process that then has to be funded formally per se by itself. So I just wanted to make that point, because I just think that all of this stuff, we have to figure out new and creative ways of doing it. We can't just think about the traditional ways of doing these things, whether it's research or on the ground activities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's a great bookend of the conversation. And again, we had a whole bunch more questions, and we could have had, a multi-hour conversation. And I really hope that this is the beginning of continued conversation in the region. And I know I've had the great privilege of being connected to new colleagues and peers in this space as a byproduct of being invited into your community. So thank you for that.